All right. So thank you for doing this with me. So let's just start for everyone because we obviously know each other. But for people watching this who don't know either of us, I'm Alana Miller. I'm an integrative psychiatrist in LA. And one of the things I do is teach and mentor psychiatrists and psych MPs on how to build integrative psychiatry private practices. And maybe just give like a one-liner intro on you.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Alysha Woods. I'm a psych nurse practitioner and I own a private practice, integrative psychiatry practice in Los Angeles. I see anywhere from age 4 to technically people in their 60s, but more like 6 to 30s is my typical population.
Yeah, you're in that kind of like child, adolescent, young adult niche, I would say.
Yeah.
So let's like go back in time for a second to summer of 2021, which is when we first started working together. Tell me, where were you at then in your life with your practice and how did you end up stumbling across me?
Sure. Yeah, I had quit my full-time job in December of 2020. It was very stressful working for a hospital during the pandemic. And I thought, can a psych NP start a private practice? I wasn't sure in California because of the restrictions. So I took a part-time job and decided to research starting in like January 2021, fumbled around a lot, launched around May, and then had this idea, I should Google people that I want to be like, and kind of model a little bit off of what they've done. And so I saw that you had a newsletter and that you were going to announce a group. And so I joined the newsletter and I joined your program, I think in like August or September of 2021.
Yeah. And you were like in the beta group. So just for people watching, I launched this program around August of 2021 and I hadn't built anything yet. So Alysha, you just joined on a promise of I'm building this thing. I swear it'll be good. And it was you. And I think it was like a group of 8 of us that started. And then it kind of all evolved from there. And so going back, so you first started your practice around May. How was it going those first couple months for you? Like what was working, what wasn't working?
Yeah, it was tough. I was sharing an office with a psychiatrist friend of mine. And so I had a little bit of modeling from her. It was tough because I knew I wanted to be a cash practice, but I just didn't know how to market anything. She gave me a little bit of overflow. And so I just wasn't sure what was realistic. I was slowly getting patients.
So you were charging cash, you were getting some patients, but it just didn't feel like you necessarily had the marketing process of attracting cash patients, maybe like fully dialed in.
That, and I also just really didn't know my worth at all. Like I was just like, oh, I should charge less than my psychiatrist friend because I'm an NP, and I didn't really know my value. I think at that time, I come from a family where it's like, if you want to make more money, you work more hours. So I feel like I was severely undercharging. Yeah,
I remember.
I was kind of fumbling around. Yeah.
It's interesting because I talk a lot to NPs, who are considering joining my program. And one of the things they often will say is, okay, yeah, this works for psychiatrists, but I don't think this could work for a psych NP. Because I think you guys just deal with a lot more self-doubt. For us psychiatrists, it's a known path we can take. We can go into academics, we can go into a job like Kaiser, we can go into private practice. Whereas for psych NPs, there's a lot of confusion around, is this even legal? Like, am I allowed to do this? And then all the rules, do I need a collaborating psychiatrist, which is so state dependent? And then all the stuff where you get in your head, well, I can't charge more than a psychiatrist because I'm like lesser than a psychiatrist is I see like a block people have. Tell me about what was the vision you were hoping to achieve prior to you joining my program? Where were you hoping to get to?
Yeah, mostly that I wanted, this is going to sound so silly, but I wanted to be doing what you're doing. So I was just like, why not join and pay someone that's doing what I want to do and learn? That was one piece. And I like that you were in Los Angeles. That helped. And the community too, because just no one around me was doing it. And the culture for nurse practitioners, it's different state to state. Like in California, there's a lot of restrictions. So we're kind of seen as kind of like a helper or less than. Then in Oregon, where there's full practice, they know they can start practices. I just wanted to see what was out there. I knew that you were kind of getting people from around the US. So I was just curious to see what other people were doing.
Yeah, kind of the idea of, okay, here's someone who has achieved pretty much what I want to achieve. So that's a good person to kind of hitch on to and like learn whatever I can learn from them. Now, fast forwarding a little bit, you're in the program. What did it do for you? Like, if you're kind of looking back, what were the changes that you implemented in your approach? And then what happened?
Yeah, I'm thinking of three things off the top of my head. One is that you don't learn integrative psychiatry and psych NP programs. So I learned the clinical side, which was super helpful. That was a huge goal of mine because I always wanted to do psychotherapy, labs, supplements, all of the integrative interventions. So I wanted to know that piece, which yes, fast forward, I feel like I've learned those really well through your protocols. The other thing is that I'm charging 3 times what I did in the beginning, which is huge for me because it's just like your program is a culture of you can do it. Just try it. You have a lot of worth. You're offering something that not a lot of people offer. You start to kind of believe it being in your program. And then the other thing is I feel like it's been really nice meeting the other members and collaborating with them on all kinds of things, everywhere from friendship to clinical questions to what's our next business move, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, totally. What's that saying? Like, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think that ends up being a limiting factor for not just psych MPs, but psychiatrists. We get these voices in our head that you can't do this. For us, it's not that we can't do private practice. For us, it's you're bad if you do private practice. You're greedy, you're selfish, you're not really helping people, or you're going to not be successful. Business is too complicated. So everyone tends to have those voices in their head of doubt. But then if you're with the right people, you see like, oh, I'm not crazy for wanting this. And also, this is not actually rocket science. Like, I always tell people that of all the businesses a person can start, a psychiatry private practice, especially an integrative one, is just about the easiest one because of the supply demand curve. I mean, there's just not enough supply and there's a ton of demand, especially if you're providing that extra holistic care. So you mentioned you tripled your fees. I love the specifics on this. Tell me, what were you charging before we started working together? What are you charging now?
Yeah, so for an intake, I was charging $350. Most of what I was seeing in LA was like $500 or $600 for an eval, and that was even like high for a nurse practitioner. So I was charging $350 for an intake, and I think $150 for follow-ups, and psychotherapy somewhere in between, depending on the amount of time. Then now I'm charging $1,000 for an intake, and my 30-minute follow-ups are $325. So
I just want to sit on that number 1,000 because I can't tell you, and I know we've talked about this before, how many psych MPs who are telling me, oh, I can't do it. A psych MP can't do this. I'm like, there's someone in my program who charges $1,000 for an intake, and you've got plenty of patients. Like, you sometimes have to turn down patients, right? Like your practice is kind of at a steady state, and so I'm curious, what was the breakthrough for you internally that allowed you to make such a dramatic change over that, a year or so in your fees and do it successfully?
Yeah, I remember asking you through this process. I took a jump from $350 to $450, and I realized I still was getting a ton of people. And then I remember you saying something to the effect of, between $350 and $450. To me, it seemed huge, right? I was like, oh my gosh. But I remember you saying it wasn't actually that big of a jump to the client. Then I decided to make a big jump to $595 for an intake. And then the reason I made the other jump was I was talking to you about getting too many patients for me to see. It was a strategy that you had taught, like, bump the fees up so that the patients you do see are at a really decent rate, and it kind of slows down because I felt like I was almost getting full.
No, totally. So a couple of things. One is that it was a gradual process. And this is, I teach essentially 2 pricing strategies for private practice. And there's a third one, which I don't recommend. The one I don't recommend, let's start with that, is set low fees, undercharge, and then immediately when someone questions your fees, slide that in half. My fee's $300. Oh, just kidding. It's $150, which I think literally is what most people do. Undercharge and then freak out if anyone balks and they lower it from there. Now, of the reasonable options, there are 2. One is to just start with really high fees out of the gate and then go forward. And the benefit of that is that ultimately, if you start at more moderate fees, you're going to have to increase your fees every couple of months. And then you're keeping track of a bunch of different fee schedules for different patients. So that's a downside. Another downside is that you'll grow slower for sure. The more you charge, the fewer patients you'll get, but they will be better patients. They'll be patients that are more aligned with what you do. But then I think there are some downsides that make the approach you did and what I did the same thing you did, better for a lot of people, which is start moderate to high, like solid fees, not undercharging, but not crazy high. And then get confidence, get like half a dozen patients at those fees, then raise them, then get confidence at that level, then raise them, inch it up. And that way it allows you to also build your clinical skills in parallel with increasing your fees. So you're learning new things, whether it's like new psychotherapy techniques or med management or holistic integrative psychiatry that warrants higher fees. And then you'll comfortable with charging a fee that is commensurate with the benefit that you're getting the patient. And going back to the fee thing, so I remember us having a very specific conversation over the chat, which is you said, oh, I'm considering raising my fees, and I gave you a number. You're like, I can't do that. That's more than my collaborating psychiatrist. Do you remember what I said to you?
Yes. Yeah, you said like, tell her to raise her fee.
Yeah. I was like, sorry, she's undercharging. That's not your problem. Like,
yeah.
Medicine is very hierarchical. And so we get it in our head that, you know, a psych MP can't charge more than a psychiatrist, or an early career psychiatrist can't charge more than a more experienced psychiatrist or an older psychiatrist. And to that, I say, sorry, that's actually not how the real world works. The hierarchy in medicine, I mean, it makes sense in the sense that obviously you want to be learning from the people who have more experience than you. But in the real world, where this is a business, people pay for the value they get. And it's the patient who decides what's valuable, not how many degrees you have, not how old you are, because it's very possible that you can be a psychiatrist who's practiced 30 years, but you're really no better than you were 30 years ago, because a psychopharm is not rocket science. You basically learn all the psychopharm you need to know in 6 months to a year. Then what are you going to do? Like, you actually have to put in the work to grow as a clinician. And then age doesn't guarantee wisdom, you know, and youth doesn't preclude it. And also doesn't preclude being more valuable to your patients. So tell me a little bit about the kinds of interventions you are using with your patients, because integrative psychiatry, a lot of people don't really know what that means. And it kind of means different things to different people. Like, what does it mean to you? Like, how have you been implementing it with your patients?
One of the things I think is that it's a philosophy, the way that you treat, starting lower or less medications or being very careful with medications. There's a lot of relationship building. I feel like integrative psychiatry, typically it's longer visit times, psychotherapy, being able to provide that intervention yourself. What I learned in your program was kind of the nuts and bolts of lab work, how to interpret lab work that I had not learned in training, how to assess for essential vitamin deficiencies, how to recommend supplementation, how and when to recommend it. And then things like training, we would talk about bright light therapy, but you give actual protocols on how to
this is the dose, this is how you explain it to the patient.
Yes, when in training it's like, oh, you know, there's bright light therapy things and maybe you could recommend fish oil, you know, like that's more our training, but you really go through dosing.
And the thing is, with integrative psychiatry, it really, people sometimes misunderstand it to mean alternative psychiatry, and it's very much not that. We practice standard of care psychiatry with extras. And the amazing thing is that we get to, because we have more time with our patients, such good relationships with our patients, we really can get to know them and personalize things according to their biology and physiology, but also their personality, their values, and their belief systems.
Right.
And I think we get much better outcomes because we do that in a way that I don't think a psychiatrist or psychic MP can get in a job where you're seeing patients every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes.
I mean, I think that integrative psychiatry too it feels very much like what's coming next too. There's things that you bring into your program. Like when you had first started your program, I don't think we were talking about low dose naltrexone, but now, you know, you have these in your protocols. And I think these are things that now I'm starting to hear from other places other than your program. So I think that integrative psychiatry is kind of this forefront of the way to be more evidence-based and the way to be looking forward to what's coming out for patients.
No, I appreciate you saying that, because I feel that too, where integrative psychiatry feels ahead of the curve. I mean, now I've been doing this long enough where I'm like, my colleagues are saying things and I'm like, yeah, I knew that 10 years ago, you know, but no one took me seriously 10 years ago. So I'm like, I just know, you know, in 10 years, the stuff that we're doing now is going to be considered standard of care. And especially when you look at a lot of the integrative interventions are very low risk. We're not talking about doing things that are high risk without adequate research, but we really understand that evidence-informed medicine, that the burden of proof that's necessary to recommend something should be determined by potential risks, toxicities, side effects, effects, cost. And if it's not expensive or having a lot of side effects or toxic, then you don't need a Cochrane review to say that something is reasonable, especially if the patient believes that that thing is going to work. And you're also leveraging the relationship, the placebo effect and everything. Another thing too, like psychedelic, that's on the tip of everyone's tongue these days. There's a whole bunch of people in the program that are very knowledgeable in this area. And I would say that I was less knowledgeable. I mean, some personal experience, but not so much, the research experience. But there's people who have been involved in the research studies in psychedelics. Kaylin, who traveled to Peru every summer to study Amazonian plant medicine. I want to shift to the marketing piece of it from the clinical. To increase your fees, it's one thing to have more confidence, but it's just not enough. Just having a ton of confidence doesn't necessarily guarantee, What did you do differently in terms of how you positioned yourself, positioned what you did, marketed based on what I taught in the program?
You specifically in your program, you review our unique selling points. So the USP. So that is what in your background can you put at the forefront of your marketing to show that you know what you're talking about or that you have experience in what the patient's looking for. That's one. So having that support where you are giving us feedback. And then also with my marketing, it was developing relationships with other professionals in the area that also charge kind of at a similar rate, have a similar philosophy, see a similar patient population.
Yeah, totally. The two main things when it comes to marketing is one, you have to be differentiated. And this is actually the part I find really fun in the program is because everyone is so unique who joins. Everyone has a different story, whether it's their personal lived experience or their clinical interest or crazy places they've traveled or languages they speak or modalities they want to implement into their practice. And it's fun for me to help take that unique stuff that they probably take for granted and make sure that getting an outsider perspective of, this is extremely unique. You need to highlight this on your website. And then the website becomes the home base that when you then build those referral relationships, even if they get your name from a referral, the first thing they're going to do is Google you and they go to your website. And then the things that you explain on your website can be what makes that patient choose you as opposed to any other psychiatrist, psych MP they might get referred to. I want to know some specific numbers because one of the conversations I always have with people considering my program is figuring out if the return on investment is going to work for them. Two questions. One is if you can imagine a parallel world, where do you think you would be now with your practice if we hadn't connected, if we hadn't met, if you hadn't joined my program? Because you would have been successful anyway. Maybe it would have just taken you longer. And then if there's a dollar amount you can attribute extra that you made.
Sure. Yeah, I think that kind of how I was researching from January to May, kind of fumbling around, asking around, not sure. I think I would still be in that space, maybe a little bit in analysis paralysis because of different opinions. It's nice to get the opinion of one mentor. So I think that it's a peace of mind. Oh, and another thing I think is also just when you're around people that are looking for the next thing, I have kind of a different mindset now where I'm like, what directions can I grow my business? There's so many ways once you become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I would have been here this quickly. Maybe feeling like an entrepreneur and I can do different things with my practice might have taken me longer again. Dollar amount. Well, I have 100 patients and the first 15 were at my 350 rate. So that leaves 85 patients that are at higher rates.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking thousands.
I'm really curious. Let me see if I can do some math
because you
on
think
this.
of a lifetime,
No, totally. How many patient encounters do you have in a week about?
20.
Okay. I'm going to do a little back of the envelope math. 20 a week. So let's say you take a month off a year, 20 times 4.33. That's about 86 a month times, let's do 11 months. And then let's break even. What was your hourly rate before and what is it now?
Maybe my hourly rate before was $250 an hour and now I'm at between $500 and $600 an hour, so $550.
This is what I'm going to do. How much would you make in a year at the old rate versus the new rate? 952 times 250, 238, 178, 500, about $178,000 $200,000 a year, and then 550 times 0.75 times 952, 392 minus 178,500. That so I'm coming out at like 200 grand difference in a year. Thinking about just a single year going forward, because you're going to be making more every year for the rest of your career. So potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars extra.
Yeah, because before, when I started my private practice, I viewed everything as money coming out of my pocket. I wasn't an entrepreneur. No one in my family is an entrepreneur. If anything, some family members tried to start businesses and it didn't work, which made me feel like maybe it wouldn't work. So when I first started private practice, I just thought of just money leaving, and it was hard. But I was like, but I don't know how else I'll learn or how else I'll do it. So I just have to like take a risk. And now I really understand when you put money into something, you have to think of it as, what is it going to get back for you? And I think this is a big case of that. It's not money just out into the universe, gone from your paycheck. It's reinvested, in yourself and
Totally.
your potential for, years. My career could be, I don't know, 30, 40 more years.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, it's when you think of it over that long time horizon, you're right. You have to think differently about where you put money in private practice. It's different in a job. In a job, your salary is set and there's a ceiling. It's going to probably go up every year by some percentage point to either cover inflation and or a raise, but it can't do more than that. But in business, and a private practice is a business, you can have returns that are astronomical. Like you spend $1,000 on something and you make 10,000. When I interviewed Jeff, I had the same conversation with him. We're both cancer survivors. Life is too short to just do things slower than you have to, like reinvent the wheel, to not be like pursuing your dreams as rapidly as you can, every moment.
Yeah, cancer definitely slaps you in the face with that one, because you're like, am I doing exactly what I want to do right now? Yeah, I agree.
I have one last question, and before we kind of transition to talking about what you're working on. If
Sure.
you were to say like a surprise benefit of my program that maybe wasn't something you had anticipated going into it, but ended up being something really great to you, what would that be?
Yeah, I think two things. One is that I just had no idea that thinking like an entrepreneur was totally different. So that was a surprise benefit to me, because I didn't know it existed. I thought some people were just born into knowing it or born into generational wealth. And so then they just know how to do that. And so that was a surprise benefit, that entrepreneurship could be learned and grown. That was a surprise benefit, because I didn't even know it existed, or that it could be for me. And then another surprise benefit was just like the relationships. I feel like a lot of the people in the program, a few in particular, they're just good people and good to bounce ideas off of, maybe business ventures in the future. You just never know. They're just like like-minded people when they get together. It's just could be magical.
No, I feel that way too, honestly. And I've talked before in some videos I've done about how that wasn't something I anticipated being a part of the program, was the community part. When I first started, it was really just me teaching you guys stuff in a group setting. But then, remember we had a Slack channel. We didn't have the forum, we just had the Slack channel, and people could post me questions there. But then I noticed people started answering each other's questions in the Slack channel, and they gave me this idea of, let's create this community forum, and then switch from Kajabi to School. And now it's become this amazing thing, and everyone's so supportive. I actually take great pride that my forum is one of the few places on the internet that is not a total cesspool. Like, I can't go on Facebook. It's so negative. Even Instagram comments are starting to get negative. I'm like, can people just enjoy a cute cat video without getting super negative? And everyone is just super supportive and helpful. And now we've got like over 100 people in the group, and everyone has different area of expertise. It's been like really joyful. I think that's been a surprise benefit for me too, that I didn't anticipate, when I started it. And it's been really fun.
Yeah. And I don't know the experience of this as a doctor, but the experience of this as a nurse practitioner is huge, because in the workplace, you almost feel like you hope that the new job you get, you'll have like a doctor ally that's like, doesn't think that you're less or
Totally.
or untrained.
Yeah,
And so you just
yeah.
kind of hope that you could ask questions to a colleague, nurse practitioner or doctor. Sometimes nurse practitioners with a lot of experience can give the same vibe as,
Yeah.
and you just kind of hope that you can ask questions and not get that, why don't you know this?
Yeah.
Or so it's really, I feel like, an extra special thing for a nurse practitioner to be in a community where doctors view us as
As equals, honestly.
yeah. You can hear like I'm almost like,
I
do
know
I
you
say
like you
it?
weren't gonna say it. Yeah, you didn't want to say it.
Yeah, because that's just the culture. I mean, this is the culture in the
Yeah,
workplace and the culture online. And so being able to
totally.
ask those questions is huge, and having those relationships is huge. So yeah.
It's such a good point because I sometimes get detached from that because, when I was in residency, we did really interact with NPs. So I had no pre-existing opinion. I mean, I've been treated by lots of NPs, but then the vibe among psychiatrists online, especially, is like this antagonistic thing. And it honestly makes me a little sick. Like I remember posting on a psychiatry Facebook group at one point that I wanted to hire an NP and I was looking for advice on how to do that. And just everyone started like trashing NPs. And I'm like, you understand they're just people. They're just people. It's almost like this weird in-group, out-group where it honestly shocks me that there isn't more awareness among psychiatrists that it's like a really like base primal thing that's getting like almost like racism, but with psychiatrists and psych NPs. I take a lot of pride in our group is egalitarian. No one's better than anyone else. We may have different training experience or credentials, or some people have fellowship training, but it doesn't matter. We all have something to offer each other. That's probably not something that exists maybe anywhere online.
Yeah. And even in the workplace, like I said, you just hope that there's maybe like one doctor that will respect you, but also be there when you have questions. Yeah. And it's like, it's not even just a front that people are being nice because they're in your program. Even when people have private messaged me, it's not like, why do you charge your fees? Psychiatrists that are new, starting in practice, they're not like, why are you charging those fees? They're like, oh, you've had a private practice for almost 2 years now. How? How did you do this?
Totally. Yes.
And so it's like, oh, wow. The philosophy, I think, of the people is different.
I love that. I love that you kind of, you have these relationships with other people in the group, but also just too, I love that that's a question people ask because it's the right question. If you see someone who has something you want, you don't get upset at it or get mad. You ask, how did they do it? I want to learn how they did it. And you learn from them. That's the entrepreneurial mindset. I'd say that's a major difference between the employee mindset. Oh, I'm mad they have something I don't versus, oh, they have something I don't. I'm going to learn from them. And that's how we are able to achieve what we've achieved, I think, relatively quickly. Like you're 2 years into your practice. I'm 6 years into my practice. It's not like we've been practicing 30 years, but we're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Well, let's transition to what you're working on because you're working on this group supervision program yourself. So share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So like I had said, something I kind of learned in this program was just that there's so many things you can do with a private practice. As we had mentioned, we're both cancer survivors. So I felt like my capacity, both emotionally and physically, I think wasn't that I could see patients 40 hours a week. And so I was interested in providing some type of mentorship as well. And so what I'm working on right now is a case consultation group for nurse practitioners, kind of evolving from everyone in the Psych NP community knows there's this Facebook group that just like people will post anonymously because they're scared of what people say.
No.
Yeah. But people have real clinical questions. And, if someone's like, oh, if they ask a question that's fairly basic, this SSRI versus this one, and someone will be like, wow, I can't believe you didn't know this. Or blah, blah. So that's where this idea came from, was a case consultation group where people can ask questions and have kind responses, both for NP students, practicing NPs with experience. And also I want to offer myself and my experience, if people have questions about child adolescent psychiatry or something that I've had experience in, because sometimes people don't have that availability for a case consult at their jobs.
Yeah, it's such a good point because, obviously you do your Psych NP training, but then I'd say probably for the first couple of years after that, you're still engaged in learning all the psychopharm and gaining confidence in practicing with actual clinical cases. And I didn't even think about this aspect of that. It's because Psych NPs already maybe sometimes feel insecure that they don't feel safe asking psychiatrists at their job or even some of the more experienced like NPs questions that you're kind of stuck feeling unsafe or uncomfortable getting the supervision we all had to get in order to know what we know. And so I love the idea of having a supportive environment where you can get that ongoing supervision and just ask like clinical questions based on cases you're seeing, even if it's like in your job. So tell me, how does case group work? Like, how often do you guys meet? What's it like?
Yeah, I'm just barely starting it. So I'm really going to feel out what people want. It's going to start with a community forum and 2 group calls a month, but that may evolve if people tend to lean toward a different niche of psychiatry and I need to bring in someone else that has more experience and say like Suboxone. I feel like it's just going to really depend on the members, and that's the start of it. Will be a forum and 2 group calls, but we'll see the direction that people want.
And don't understate your experience. You're super knowledgeable. I mean, you teach me a lot of stuff about child and adolescent because I didn't have fellowship training in that, and residency I did like 6 weeks on a child, inpatient unit. I don't know child, so you know for sure a lot more than I do about that. And also for everyone, all the psych NPs watching this, going along the lines of that hitch your ride to the star you want to follow mentality. If you want to be an NP charging $1,000 for an intake, join Alysha's consultation group and you'll learn the secret sauce of how she does that.
Thank you.
So tell me, who is the group for? Like, who would be a good fit for it?
Yeah, so good fits would be Psych NP students, of course. They're doing their rotations. Sometimes their preceptor is very, very busy seeing a patient every 15 minutes and they don't have time to ask questions like, why did you do this? Why did you do that? So Psych NP students, either before your rotations or during. I think it would be particularly helpful for Psych NPs that are at a job where you don't have any supervision or maybe you're the only NP. A lot of rural community NPs where you're the only NP for miles, and any Psych NP looking for community. If you're a Psych NP and you're kind of switching to a new job where you're doing something that you're not familiar with, like if you always worked outpatient, but now you're moving to consult liaison psychiatry, or if you're switching from adult to child and you feel like most of your experience and training has been in one area. Also open to NPs of other specialties like family nurse practitioners, adult gero nurse practitioners, nurse midwives that may have questions regarding psych, or if they're wondering if they should get their dual certification in psychiatry as a Psych NP.
Yeah. That's great because like there's a lot of psychiatry in family practice, family medicine. Mm-hmm. So NP nursing students, early career NPs, or just any NP who wants more education, more learning, more help as they're getting going on their knowledge base. And honestly, like sincerely, you are super smart and you really know what you're talking about. You really help like the group with the cases that you comment on and the input you've given. The people come to my group calls to ask me questions, but it also often ends up being more of a dialogue because there's people in the group who have more expertise than I do in certain areas. And I really appreciate that you've contributed in that way.
Thank you.
When are you going to be launching like the first round of this, like the beginnings of this?
Yeah, it's likely going to be either the last week of April or the first week of May, 2023.
Okay, great. So coming up, and probably we're recording this April 7th. So probably will take me like a week or 2 to edit it and get it posted. So coming up pretty soon. And if people are interested, how do they find you? And I'll post the URL under this video. Where should I go to your website or?
Yeah, you can post the URL for the waitlist. So that is going to have a launch at a special price. For the first week it's out, it'll be a special pricing. So sign up, put your email in that waitlist.
So it'll be posted under this video. Is there anything else you want to share before we finish?
No, I think I'm good.
I so appreciate you doing this. And I want to just end on a note, which is a sincere note, which is that I sincerely consider you a friend as well. Like you were one of the first people that came into my group. So you've been with me in the beginning and given me a lot of good feedback for how I run things. It's been fun working with you on your program. And I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. And thank you so much for everything you've done. Obviously, everyone can see in the interview. So thank you for all of that.
All right. Well, have a good rest of your day. I'll see you soon.
You too.
Bye.